Hello! This chapter is focused on leveraging technology to better attract and retain talent. Derek Williamson, CEO of HigherMe, will also discuss interviewing best practices and gaps in our current processes today. Welcome, Derek. Thanks for taking the time today and look forward to our chat.
So I'm going to turn over you to do some introductions and then we'll get into the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kelly. And thanks for having us. I am the CEO of a company called HigherMe, and our focus is on hiring in the restaurant space, and specifically on taking candidates from the time of application to the time of their first day. We work with close to 10,000 restaurant locations across North America today, and have just been really focused from day one on the restaurant industry, and really knowing that I come from a background of owning franchises and managing franchises, and it's really like kind of in our DNA. And so it was kind of the natural extension. And of course, our product reflects that as well. We've gone really deep on understanding how folks hire in this industry specifically.
And, competitive market for sure. And even, pre-COVID, but, I think there's always been a stigmatism of, especially with, Gen Zs and younger generations, that working in restaurants might not be cool, right? Like how can tech and how can some of the way we recruit people kind of bring some cool back to the restaurant?
Yeah, and I think it's a totally fair observation. There's a lot of data points out there to suggest that it's not that Gen Z isn't working, but they're looking at different industries. And one of the things that I think traditionally kind of gets neglected when we talk about hiring in the restaurant industry is how great some of the foundational experience in restaurants is, right? If you are serving in a restaurant, you are priming yourself for a career in sales or marketing or many different things. And every single role in a restaurant has that transferable skills that you're building. And honestly, I think that is probably one of the biggest things that we can kind of emphasize today, because Gen Z cares more about, what are you doing for me? Why should I be interested in working for you? And I think we miss that. Like, it's great to have opportunity for advancement within your organization, but not everyone is going to stay in the industry, but there are some great experiences and skills to be gained from working in the industry. And we've seen a lot of success from employers that have started to promote a lot more of that. In addition to just kind of speaking to what they're doing that's, helping the world, helping the environment, social causes, because that's been a lot more important with Gen Z. One other thing, as far as technology as well, I think there's some obvious things as far as engaging candidates with text messaging and messaging apps and things like that being a lot more personable. But really, I think a lot of technology now helps you kind of find a really good voice for your employer brand as well. So really finding that and kind of running with it, I think is really important.
And so, if you're a restaurant out there and looking at maybe updating or changing or kind of rethinking your recruiting strategy, what advice do you have? Like how and where should they be engaging with people to try and recruit them?
Yeah, it's a really great question. What we come into a lot of the time is employers that have kind of exhausted the traditional job boards. They've been posting on Indeed, they've been posting on Craigslist, and you're starting to tap into the same pool over and over again, and you're not reaching new people. And I don't think we're able to get away from some of those just yet, but starting to look at, it goes down to like community involvement for the markets that you're in, looking at organizations you can partner with and getting a little more creative there. But also just kind of finding other ways to engage people in your location. If it's with hiring, how are the people that are coming into your store, your current customers, how are they going to find out about, how they get a career or get a job in your company? As well as having a really strong online presence, and really kind of making sure that you can be found, that you're, on Google, that you can, candidates that are searching for positions in their area can find your positions as well. So, I think it's really broadening the reach, I think, overall, and really looking at some of those pockets. One of the more topical things as well that we've been helping employers with is around diversity and inclusion. And that is where traditional job boards tend to kind of fall flat. For communities that are disadvantaged or, traditionally have barriers to employment, they lose faith and trust very quickly in sort of those traditional job boards. And so you kind of have to go to them a little bit and find some of those other pockets where you can reach them as well.
And so also I would think, coming out of COVID, some of the traditional ways of hiring, right, or having people apply for jobs, of the old hand you a piece of paper or come in and fill out on a kiosk. Like, how is kind of this, new norm that we talk about, how do you see that kind of influencing that, recruiting to really application process for, potential candidates?
Yeah, and really topical and something we're talking to employers a lot about as well. I think definitely there's been a big shift recently towards virtual hiring and more of that like contact-free hiring. And we've seen a lot of conversations on that, and employers have been very quick to realize that they need to start to look at some of those strategies. And I really do think what's going to happen is they're going to start to use some of those things and see a lot of the benefits and decide to keep them even when 2021, 2022, whatever it is, that we maybe go back to a little bit more of a normal state. I think employers are going to continue to use some of those systems, again, for like that virtual hiring or group hiring events has been a really, really big thing for this market. And yeah, there's been a lot of focus on doing more there. I think that's one that is going to stick around too, right? More cost effective for employers. It also reduces the barriers for candidates. We kind of forget, like, if it's your first job and you're going into a restaurant, I think we all probably remember that, right? You're nervous and
you feel like sweating a little bit.
Exactly. And so I think it goes a long way to kind of remove some of those barriers. If at least the person can be, in their home, maybe in their sweatpants underneath the camera, a little more comfortable, it kind of removes a little bit of that friction. So a lot of employers that have started to use it that we've been working with have really seen some success doing that.
So Derek, I think the interesting piece is, throughout my career, and we've seen, we throw a lot of managers into interviewing people, which takes some training, and it's not just, some basic questions that you ask to try and get, an understanding of the candidate. Like there's a real art and science to it, but yet we don't necessarily seem to spend enough time training managers how to do it effectively. Like, what best practices can you give, restaurateurs and operators of how to better equip their managers to really conduct an interview that's going to, deliver an outcome that they're looking for, which is to really assess people to make sure they're the right fit?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it makes me think of my background, when I ran an ice cream store franchise. No one really spent a lot of time with me on how to hire, what that process should look like, some of the biases to watch out for. I heard a stat the other day that on average in the hourly hiring space, the average interview there will be 12 illegal questions asked in an interview. Which is of course shocking. And I think it just speaks to kind of the lack of good training and frameworks that are out there and provided. And it really is, there's some fundamental things, believe it or not, a lot of employers go in and just kind of wing the interview. I think it's very easy to fall into that trap. But you always want to have very consistent interview questions and a very clear scoring gradient as well. And whether you're using technology or just doing it on paper, you do want to keep a record of those kind of things as well. It's good to be able to reflect on it yourself. And then of course, if there's ever a claim or anything like that. But then, as you alluded, really, really putting some thought into questions that help highlight experiences that are maybe unique to candidates. And a very common one that we come into with one of our partners who works with Indigenous communities is questions about their involvement in the community. And you want to make sure that you ask questions in a very open-ended way so that candidates who maybe have non-traditional experience can still speak to those questions and kind of be evaluated fairly. And a common one is, in Indigenous communities, they may be very involved in those communities and have different roles of leadership or things like that. But if you ask a question in sort of a way that says, what's your experience in managing people or things like that, you may kind of overlook some of those. So really being thoughtful in the questions you ask. And then I think just having a very clear scoring gradient is like probably the most basic thing that a lot of employers still kind of need to improve upon.
Yeah, and my suspicion is those 12 illegal questions, people probably just don't even know that they shouldn't be asking those questions, right? Because I'm guessing what some of them are, and you probably, again, you just don't realize that you're not supposed to be asking them. And I think the other thing is, from a best practice perspective, and there's always this debate of skills versus kind of cultural fit. And, and in your experience, which one would you lean more towards, or is it equal between skill and culture, or is it, like what makes up I don't want to say the perfect candidate, but, like the ideal candidate of a blend from that perspective?
Yeah, it's interesting. In hourly hiring, I think every operator, franchisee, general manager has a story, and probably many, about people who came in who had no experience, but maybe they just, the manager happened to be in that day and met the person in person and thought, wow, this person has really great personality. They seem to have the energy, and ended up being a great employee, right? And I think that does speak to the cultural side rather than hard skills. I used to always say in the restaurant industry, like when I had the ice cream store, I can teach anyone to scoop ice cream, but I can't teach manners and personality and just having some energy and, coming to work with a smile on your face, all those kind of basic things. The caveat, I think, with culture is that it can reinforce bias as well. And so you do want to be really cognizant of that you're not just reinforcing a culture of people that all think the same and, act and behave the same as well. So there's like a little bit of a trade-off there, but I really think in most cases, culture trumps those hard skills, specifically in the restaurant industry. That's kind of my thoughts on that.
No, I agree 100%. There's some, like you said, it's inherent in people's nature. Either you're, have kind of grit, determination, a work ethic. Like those are things that are part of your DNA, not something that can be taught, right? So yeah, no, I definitely agree. And I think, but the tricky part is, how do you measure that cultural fit, right? How do you figure out if they're the right candidate? You talked a couple times about bias, and it's prevalent, right? It happens. And so a subconscious bias when you're looking at an application or, going through an interview process, like what are some, we talked about some of the interview questions, but like, training specifically on that, and probably one of my most eye-opening trainings that I've done, in my career, because again, it's subconscious. You don't think the way you think sometimes. Like, how do you start to take that out of the interview process, or some best practices?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Unfortunately, I don't know that there's an easy answer, other than I think a lot of employers are intimidated by the idea of having to tackle some of these things, right? Diversity and inclusion, I know it's important. How do I approach this for my business? How do I tackle issues of implicit bias? And honestly, the answer is to just start and start having conversations with people in the community. There's lots of great organizations out there that are happy to have conversations with you and give you some advice on, some of the things they see. And also lots of great organizations that will provide training and often free of charge for, implicit bias and things like that. Because I think there really is no hard and fast rule or framework of like where to start. I think it just depends where your company is, where your organization is. But the important part is just starting, right? And not treating it as if it's something that you have to have a whole department for or something like that. Everyone is involved in, tackling bias, and also, just making sure you're a diverse and inclusive organization.
Derek, great insights, right? And I think the most important part is like you said, start. Acknowledge that you need to start moving forward in some of those initiatives. So, maybe we kind of wrap this up and talk about a couple different things. Is again, we've talked about it a little bit, but through this hiring process, where do you see technology continuing to kind of enable a better kind of, recruiting and hire strategy, and kind of where you see some of the trends from that happening? And then, also too would love to get your, perspective of how the labor market's changing coming out of, still in COVID, kind of into this new norm, and where you see, some of the opportunities from that standpoint.
Yeah, really good question. I think, in terms of the trends, there's a couple big ones. Obviously, we kind of touched on the virtual hiring and doing more virtually. I think a lot of restaurants suddenly had to learn how to use Zoom and other video conferencing tools very quickly. But I think some of those are going to continue. What we see, there's a lot of noise, and there has been for quite a long time in the hiring space, using AI and all of these tools to sort of evaluate candidates and better match candidates to your current culture and things like that. And we are starting to see more of that, but they're coming in with, again, like that approach to eliminating bias rather than reinforcing bias. And that's where I do see some promising technologies coming in to the hiring space as well, to enable the managers to hire and make decisions more effectively rather than using technology to make those decisions, I think is one of the big trends. One of the, on the labor market side, one of the big trends is that I think for the next little while, things are going to be very much a roller coaster. We have seen so many of the organizations we work with go through these sprints of hiring because they have to open up again. And then, then they're in an area where it's back to reduced capacity, then they have to lay off employees. And I think we're going to see employees continue to embrace a little bit more of a dynamic work, culture, work environment. Yeah. So, because they recognize that, job security is going to be a little challenging for a while. So I think we're definitely going to see a lot of ups and downs for quite a while. There are going to be things that affect it, like, what's being offered as far as unemployment and assistance as well. We had for quite a while, there were a lot of employers that were struggling to get anyone to apply because people didn't want to go back to work and put themselves at risk for, not really a lot of difference in terms of how much they're taking home. So I think that will be, something that we see and kind of continues for the next little while as well. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting labor market though, where we actually shake out when everyone is back to the point of needing to go back to work. I think restaurants are going to have to do a lot to compete for talent, right? And that's where it's going to be really hard when, candidates have now kind of exited the restaurant industry and they've gone into, other industries, logistics, warehousing, all of these other ones that we're seeing kind of explode right now. So it's going to be kind of hard to win some of that talent back, I think.
And I think it's going to be challenging too. So it's going to force people to be more competitive, which obviously is going to, have an impact from a profitability perspective. And so I think it comes full circle of, trying to minimize turnover by starting with a better, a stronger recruiting strategy and a better hiring strategy to try and have better engagement, so you're not having as much turnover, right? And it kind of comes a cycle. And so, I think it's going to be, interesting to watch how this plays out. But I do think technology is going to be an enabler for this, right? And so really, the focus of, and my very last question now, I promise you, is, we see all these very strong, innovative companies and, thought leaders like yourself in the industry that are really coming in and kind of making it better and, and enabling restaurants to operate more effectively. Traditionally in the past, a lot of systems have not communicated well with each other, or, it's become really a burden for restaurants to adopt new technology because of integrations and other things like that. How do you see that landscape, changing? And, the whole premise of this ebook is talking about this connected restaurant and kind of what brings that connected restaurant. And from a partner perspective in the industry, how do you see the shifts happening from that standpoint?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, exactly like you said, we've seen, and this has happened all over with software, right? Where we went from this idea of the all-in-one hub that does everything for you, everything from your hiring to your payroll to your shift scheduling to your point of sale, it's all in one. And then companies like ours came in and found, that we could be really, really good at one thing and deliver a much better experience. But exactly like you said, the next kind of challenge is, okay, now that I have 10 different systems doing 10 different things, how do I integrate them together? Obviously, companies like ours and every software company, I think, if they're not doing it, they're going to be behind if they don't have an open technology system, an open API where they can promote integrations and things like that. But I do think in the next couple of years, we are going to start to see platforms that actually exist just to connect those systems. We've seen it in lots of other areas of software. And I think it's going to come to restaurant as well, because it's not very hard to see that it's not going away, this idea of these hyper specialized software companies. And exactly like you said, there is a need to kind of link all of that data together to pass the information from the hiring system to the payroll to the shift scheduling, et cetera. So I think we're going to see some companies spin out of that. And I think we're going to see existing companies, the software providers, do a much better job and continue to go really, really deep on integrations with everyone in kind of their ecosystem as well.
No, I think it's really exciting time for restaurants, right? Because I think, again, if you can get any positive coming out of COVID, which is very difficult to talk about, is I think it made the industry wake up a little bit and say, you know what, we need to start investing in technology, and, we need to do things a little bit different to be competitive and to start to handle all the complexities that are coming through the restaurant today. And so, inspired by companies like yourself that are kind of helping navigate those waters for operators. So if people want to get in touch with you and your organization, how do they do it? What's the best way to kind of connect and engage?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always open to speaking directly with anyone. So you can email me anytime. It's just derek@hireme.com, DEREK@hireme.com, or just pop on the website. It is HIGHERME for anyone just listening in. So check out the website as well, and there's lots of ways to get in touch with us there. But always happy to connect directly, and anyone can email me anytime there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Derek. I appreciate your time.
My pleasure.